Coming up, the left bank, the Latin Quarter in Lafayette, the most influential Roman of them all, and what does a 12-year-old do with $2 million a year? Welcome to Living Lafayette. For the Lafayette Alliance in LaGrange, Georgia, I'm Richard Ingram. Paris. Julius Caesar first mentioned it in the 1st century BC, named after the Parisii. It was a Gaelic tribe that lived along the Seine River. They're running through Paris. The Parisii, the spear people, and the Seine named after the goddess of that river, Sennequab. Lafayette made the 300-mile trek from Chavagnac to Paris in December of 1767. 2 weeks, 10 years old. I remember those trips, children in the back seat. Are we there yet? Lafayette made it 21 miles a day. Can you imagine? 300 miles. Paris was no longer the largest city in Europe, not anymore. London took over that accolade in 1700. But still, at 750,000 people, it was crowded. And an indication of the density, they were no longer building out, they were building up. And in fact, they had to put a restriction on how high those apartment complexes could be built. And in 1784, that restriction was 18 meters. At 3.28 feet per meter, that would make it about 59 feet. Paris. Lafayette was now in Paris. What a transition. Chavagnac, the Chateau de Chavagnac, was large. But the Hotel Luxembourg, there on the left bank, was huge, and that was emblematic of this transition. There was the left bank, the Latin Quarter, the Sorbonne, there were Bohemians. Lafayette was now in the big time. Lafayette lived over on the left bank. Let's take a little tour of the center of Paris. Let's put that kayak in. Kayaks have been around for 4,000 years. Let's put it down south of Paris. We're going to float downstream towards Le Havre and the English Channel. The Seine is about 400 miles, and it's navigable from the English Channel, about 75 miles to Rouen, and then barges can come up even further. So we're going to go south of Paris and put that kayak in and then float downstream. There's the left bank over there. Haven't you ever wondered, how did they come to call it the left bank? I mean, it depends on which direction you're traveling. I'd never understood that until recently. It's downstream is the convention, the left bank on that side. As you're coming to that hairpin loop down in the center of Paris, there are 2 islands right in the middle of the river. First, there's the island of St. Louis, 27 acres, and it's named after the only canonized king of France. You remember Louis IX, St. Louis, and you remember that's canonized with 1 N. 2 N's, you fire him out of a cannon. Right around the corner beyond that is City Island, and there the 2 marvelous cathedrals, Sainte-Chapelle and the Grand Lady, Notre Dame. If you look over to the left, just beyond, there's that left bank over there, and there's the Sorbonne. The Sorbonne really is a building, but over time, it became emblematic, became representative of all those little satellites and colleges of the University of Paris. So there was the Sorbonne, there was the College of France, and then right in the center, the Collège du Plessis. Students lived in this quarter, and they had to speak Latin. Therefore, the Latin Quarter. It was also interesting that they had to answer to ecclesiastical authority. They had to answer to the church. They didn't have to answer to the civil police, so they could get rowdy knowing that the police couldn't do anything. So these students living in the Latin Quarter, and there were also vagrants over on that side, and they were called the Romani. They'd come from the Punjab in India, and back in the 15th century, it was thought that they had come from the east, from Bohemia. They tended to be unconventional, they were independent, they did things their own way. Bohemians. So that's where the left bank and the Latin Quarter got its reputation for this unconventionality and bohemianism over on that side. If you look to the right now, there it is, the Louvre. Where did it get that name? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe from the Latin, rubras, red soil, or maybe French, livre-tire, which means a place for training dogs to fetch and retrieve. It's really unclear. The Louvre has been a museum since 1793. Really, in the beginning, it was a fortress, and for a while, a royal residence, but it has served as a museum for these many years. And right in front of the Louvre, along the Seine, is the Tuileries Palace and Gardens. Well, the palace burned in 1871, but the gardens still exist, and they're magnificent. And it was called the Tuileries because the craftsmen who lived around it made tuiles. They were roof tiles. And right between the Louvre and the Tuileries Palace, there was a gallery that connected the two, running right along the Seine. And it was about 288 meters, so that would be about 944 feet. And today, that's a major display gallery for the Louvre, in fact. So as you're coming around now, look over to the left bank again. And there is the magnificent Luxembourg Palace, the Hôtel de Luxembourg. There were 3 architectural wonders in Paris back at that time. So one was the Louvre, the Tuileries Palace, and the Luxembourg. They were magnificent. So our Lafayette came from Chevignac to Paris. And in 1768, his residence would be at the Luxembourg Palace, which today houses the French Senate. But at that time, those were townhouses. They were like condos. And there were nobles who lived in them. So these nobles were favored by the king, and so they lived there at the king's permission. And Lafayette lived in one of those condos. And the condo was owned by the Comte de Lusignan. You remember Lafayette's great-grandfather, the Comte de la Rivière. The Comte de la Rivière, his son-in-law was the Comte de Lusignan. Lusignan had married one of de la Rivière's daughters. She died. Lusignan remarried. So now, in this townhouse, there would be the Comte de la Rivière, the Comte de Lusignan, the son-in-law, the Comtesse, the son-in-law's wife, Julie de la Rivière, and our Lafayette, living in this grand condo.